evening, everyone, and welcome to our May Town Hall. I appreciate everyone taking out their time this evening, and we're excited to have our program this evening. And we're being led in our discussion tonight by Dr. Rebecca Kastner with Roosevelt University, and I will turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Garth. Let me go ahead and pull up my slides here. Okay. Everybody able to see the slides okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. All right. So today I'm just going to do a very brief review of how we can use acceptance and commitment fundamentals to support wellness. Certainly lots more information than what I'll be going over here. Happy to answer questions. And of course, if you want to discuss later, I'm always happy to answer any questions or follow up whenever you like. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I don't have any conflicts of interest, nothing to report. In terms of objectives at the conclusion of the program, hopefully you'll all be able to describe the similarities and differences between short-term stress, chronic stress, and existential stress, identify options for recharging and recovery from stress, and finally describe how to use the life compass to create an action plan for the next week that supports life, space, and balance. So a couple of pre-test questions. First one, true or false? Research shows identifying one singular purpose or primary value in life is a key component in reducing stress and experiencing a meaningful life. So just keep that in mind as we go through. We'll go through the answers at the end, of course. And second question, according to acceptance and commitment training, ACT, which of the following is a category or categories of core values everyone holds? Relationships, health, leisure time, work, education, and volunteering, or all of the above? So first, I'll start off with talking about the stress in its many forms. So one thing that I think we've all heard at some point is that stress isn't necessarily bad. So we do have a role for stress in our lives. Stress activates our survival instincts. It helps us sort of create this fast thinking scenario where we're able to respond to something in a much faster way and potentially also perform better. So it gives us overall both a mental and physical temporary performance boost. And this acts as a result of our activation in our autonomic nervous system, resulting in these fight, flight, or freeze sorts of responses that we typically think of. And I'm sure we're all aware of those, so I won't go to those in detail, but just a reminder that this is sort of what we think about when we think about acute stress, this activation that allows us to essentially perform better in many ways. And so when we're thinking about this and why we have these responses, the reason is because we actually developed these through evolution. And so there's a quote in one of the ACT workbooks that I think is just does a really great job of summing up. You could argue that everybody alive today is the result of a breeding program rewarding the ability to react effectively to danger. So if we didn't have the ability to have this increased performance in danger, we wouldn't be able to, run at the spur of a hat out and outrun a lion. Certainly without that adrenaline pumping and that increase in heart rate and the increase in energy utilization, we would not be able to do those things. We would never be able to see those amazing things like, when people have superhuman strength and are able to lift a car off of a baby. Those are all the result of these performance boosts that we have. And so when we were evolving, our bodies were actually designed to cope with this kind of stress. It was very purposeful. We were able to act when we needed to, and then we would immediately start a recovery process as soon as the danger had passed. And at this period, this is when our balance in our body was regained. This is also when if we expended resources, both internally inside our body would start to normalize. And then also externally, we would take that resulting sort of leisure time or relaxation time, recovery time to prepare for the next time we might encounter some danger. And so this is how we were able to survive when we didn't have all of the technology that we have now. The one thing to keep in mind with this kind of stress, though, is that, when this evolved, there was only real stress, in terms of things like predators and danger that was truly life-threatening. Now we unfortunately have a lot of stressors that are not truly, in the same terms dangerous, but our body is going to react the same way to them. We're going to have those same activations and stress. And so, when we have an email that we don't like from someone, or we are sitting in traffic and somebody cuts us off, we're still going to have that stress response. It's going to be exactly the same. But you can imagine, these are over and over multiple times a day. So the key here is, when do we recover and how do we make sure that we do that? So with short-term stress, we can think of this as sort of an acute stress or a situational stress. And again, it mobilizes our body, it mobilizes our mind. When we end up not having adequate recovery or recharging from these times of short-term stress, then we can start to develop long-term or chronic stress. And this is when we start to see the sort of negative psychologic or physiologic health conditions that we typically associate with chronic stress. This also leads to brain changes, specifically in the prefrontal cortex, hippocampus, and amygdala. And so the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that controls decision making. So, complex decisions, also attention regulation, and also inhibition of automatic responses. So when we have chronic stress, this actually affects the prefrontal cortex. And what it does is it makes us have sort of a more of a tunnel vision. We don't have as much flexibility to look at all of the options available to us. We're not able to think as abstractly. And so we have trouble regulating our attention. And we might start acting sort of automatically instead, more instinctually, which isn't always helpful in the long run. With the hippocampus, this is active in creating memories, and this actually can start to atrophy with chronic stress. And so we can see, again, having trouble with creating memories due to this. And so when we think about chronic stress and when we're under a high amount of pressure that becomes unhealthy, we can think about people having trouble with memory at that time, and as well as sort of the executive function related to memory. And then for the amygdala, this is the area of the brain that processes sensory data and emotional events, and essentially activates, whether this is a true threat or not. This is the part of our brain that judges that and does that very quickly. And so this part of our brain, in contrast to the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, the amygdala actually gets sort of hypercharged, it gets stronger. And so we tend to actually see people with chronic stress react to situations to a greater extent as a threat. So, thinking about the ability to be able to sit back and decide, is this something that I really need to, worry about or address immediately? When the amygdala gets stronger, that ability to have sort of that cognitive process is overruled by the amygdala, and we do that automatic reaction instead. So thinking about that, of course, these are all things that we would want to avoid. And I think it's pretty obvious that, those in turn can lead to a vicious cycle of creating more stress if we're not addressing it properly. And then we have this third kind of stress that, is actually something that I just learned recently through learning about ECT. And I'm not sure if anyone else here has heard about it, but I think it's really interesting, this idea of existential stress. And so existential stress is basically thinking about our reduced ability to take on difficult but meaningful activities due to lack of recovery. Which in turn then can lead to further automatic actions, further reducing our ability to act meaningfully. So thinking about this, we do have activities that are very meaningful in our life that also do have a certain amount of effort or stress. And so, not everything that is, meaningful in life is going to be easy, of course. I think we all know that as pharmacists. So what this is talking about is, if we have existential stress, sometimes what happens is we actually start to, because we don't have the capability or the recovery to address something that is that we know is stressful or complex, we might start to look for activities instead that are easier, that don't cause as much stress in the short term. So sort of more of a short-sighted activity. And what that can lead to is then over time, us not being able to address those areas of value in our life that give us a lot of meaning, and actually end up acting more on that little voice in our head that's like, maybe I should have done this, or I should do this instead of doing this other thing that is meaningful for me. And these activities typically provide, a very easy, quick response or a quick finish, something that we can check off our to-do list, but overall little satisfaction compared to these sort of more stressful but more meaningful areas of life. So thinking about stress symptoms, bringing awareness to these symptoms can actually be really helpful in terms of thinking about, do I need to have a mechanism, or is this a time where maybe I'm being affected by stress acutely, so that I can bring attention to that and then make sure that I'm recovering from it. And so bringing a mindful awareness to these is going to be really helpful. If you've heard my talks before, you know that I'm a mindfulness teacher. It's something that kind of weaves into everything I do, just about. This is no exception, but it's definitely for a very specific reason that it's part of the ACT program. And it's because this can be really helpful in terms of evaluating where our stress level is and identifying what tasks might need a little more recovery than others. So these are just some common stress symptoms. They're definitely not comprehensive. Of course, people have different reactions to stress. But thinking about these in the context of sort of these 4 key domains or 4 areas. So we have bodily symptoms or physical symptoms. We also have mindset symptoms that come along with stress. So the body symptoms, we're thinking about sort of our stress response, and that's very typical, as well as, when we're thinking of exhaustion, we're seeing a lot of those come up too. For mindset, this can be something that is a little more insidious maybe, or a little more difficult to pin down. But things like confusion, forgetfulness, difficulty in prioritizing. And so again, things that we want to pay attention to, is it something that I need some recovery time here? Mood. So typically when we think of mood in times of stress, we're typically not necessarily super happy. And so a lot of our negative emotions tend to become more prominent during stress. And so that can actually in and of itself be a key that maybe, or a clue that we might need a little more recovery time. And then certain behaviors as well. So, different things that maybe are not part of our day-to-day, for the majority of the time. But we are seeing, bringing some self-awareness or some mindfulness to the activities that we're participating in, we might see a little bit more of these behaviors develop or become present. And so again, not something that we need to bring judgment to, which is something that is very easy to say rather than do. It's natural for us when we're noticing these symptoms to say, oh my gosh, like I can't believe I let myself, get stressed out again. But really the key here is an acceptance of this, just recognizing like, this is where I'm at. I need some recovery time. And that's, everybody has stress in their life. That's part of the human experience. It's not good or bad. Everybody is going to have a time where stress is overwhelming. And so the key here, and actually something that we can kind of give ourselves as a win, is like, wow, I actually recognized it this time, because then that allows us to be able to act on it, which is sort of the second half of the ACT. So thinking about mindfulness again, bringing mindfulness to stress symptoms, kind of just reiterating, we can actually have some automatic changes when we're bringing awareness through mindfulness. So again, non-judgmental awareness is really the key here, and being curious about what's going on. But if we use ACT, we can actually use this as a comprehensive framework. And so with mindfulness, again, it's something that, we always say it's not complicated, but it is difficult. So, just paying attention is not a complicated thing to do, but to do that all day, every day can be really difficult. And nobody's going to be able to be perfect at mindfulness. It's not something we achieve. And so thinking about a framework where we can say, let's make some checkpoints, or, let's create an infrastructure so that we can systematically evaluate, like, is this an area that maybe I need to pay more or less attention to? Is there some recovery that I need here? And making it a very discrete process. So acceptance and commitment training, also you can potentially hear it called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's actually used as sort of a spinoff of CBT, but it's also used very widely in terms of just what we would call a training plan as well. Again, action-based intervention. So action is very important. It creates a framework to understand personal life stressors and respond in a meaningful way. And it also emphasizes value-based behaviors, including a scheduled, balanced approach. And so when we think about acceptance, this part of the acceptance of stress, so acceptance, one of the key words here. So the key, again, is to do this non-judgmentally. Recognizing stress in and of itself can be stressful, and so just giving ourselves a little bit of grace here. Recognizing, again, we're human. Not everybody is perfect, and the point isn't to be perfect. We're never going to achieve perfection. But what we can achieve if we potentially have balance and are careful with our stress and recovery is we can lead meaningful lives that feel very fulfilling and have value. And you don't need to be perfect to do this. And so that's really the key. And so judgment, will probably come up during the process, but you can just remind yourself it's not necessary. Like, I'm a human being. And then also identification of real versus perceived stressors. Again, we talked about our brain reacts the exact same way to something that's a real danger versus something that, is maybe not real or is even a story in our head, something that isn't actually happening that we're anticipating. And then also being able to identify for us personally, what are these restorative or recharging activities, because those are potentially going to be different for everyone. So what we'll do, we're going to do a little bit of an activity together. It's going to be a little hands-on as we go through. So if you have a pen and paper handy, that is great. If not, you can certainly follow along as well. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to, wait till people get pen and paper. But we'll go ahead and get started. So the life compass is really like the underlying sort of theme or visual that we can use and keep referencing when we think about acceptance and commitment therapy or training. So there's these 4 general domains that we're taking a look at that compose the directions of the life compass. One is relationships, one is leisure time, one is health, and one is work or education or volunteering. So we already talked about these are actually some areas that maybe we see stress pop up, and we can see things change during these areas as well. So something to keep in mind. And so we also, though, can see in these various areas that there are certain activities that can help us recharge. And so this can be really helpful because we know if we're doing activities from the research that we've done with ACT, that if we're addressing these 4 basic domains in our life, this leads to full and meaningful outcomes. It allows people to feel fulfilled in their life and also become more resilient when maybe one area has some struggle in it. We have the ability to sort of almost lean on these other 4 areas. So kind of thinking about it as like, when you have stocks, like diversifying your portfolio, you're not going to put everything in one because what if something goes wrong? So you have the others to lean on when maybe there's something that's truly valuable in that area, but maybe is a little bit more stressful. So can keep us afloat. So thinking about these different activities, within these domains, these are just some examples. People have, different activities that they like to do, but thinking about the different domains, in leisure time, what are things that I know recharge, that recharge me when I do, that make me sort of fill me up, that reduce my stress. So things for leisure time like music, whether it's playing an instrument, listening, dancing, participating in a hobby, reading a book. Even, I know for me, I'm someone that needs alone time every day. And so that's a very big part of my leisure time recharge plan consistently. For relationships, so relationships, is that something that would be recharging if we had a meeting with a friend, or if we called or texted someone, if we took a trip somewhere with a person that we care about. For health, so certainly activities here, and a lot of these, again, thinking about self-care, taking a nap when we're tired, or going, even when maybe we're not super tired, but just, I can tell that I need some recharging. Going for a walk, doing yoga, going to the gym, cooking a nutritious and delicious meal. All of these things can fall under the health recharging area. And then when we think about work, education, or volunteering, so thinking about taking short breaks at work, is that recharging? Complimenting a coworker or going to lunch with a coworker can be helpful. And so just taking a minute to sort of think about, and if you can, write down maybe like 4 or 5 recharging activities that just jumped out at you as things that like you could actually do in the next week if you notice that you have some stress going on. So, oh, I'm feeling, some stress in my body, one of those typical symptoms. Maybe I should take a pause for a minute and take a couple breaths. That is right in and of itself so simple, but a recharging activity if you know that works for you. And so for the sake of time, just moving on, breezing right through. So these behaviors that we talked about that are restorative typically are related to core values that we have. And so thinking about that can be really helpful because again, we want to make sure that we're addressing all of those 4 core domains to be able to make sure that we have the most resilience, that we have, we can find the most meaning potentially, or at least have the least chance of falling into sort of that existential stress sort of scenario. So thinking about behavior related core values, thinking about leisure time. So are there some things that that correlate to leisure time that are actually values that you hold very closely? So I mentioned for myself, alone time is very important to me. So personal liberation definitely goes along with that. So definitely a core value of mine. With relationships, thinking about, what is a core value of my relationships? Is that that people think that I am trustworthy, or that they believe that I'm an honest person? Is it that I want to be nurturing for others, or that I want to cherish someone? So these can be variable from person to person. For health, so what are our core values here? Is it that I want to get to know and listen to my body so I know how to address things? Is it actually exploring spirituality in terms of my health? Is it simple living, or is it actually complex living? That those are both, values that are possible and something that are very personal. And then thinking about work and education or volunteering. So what are these core values? So, is it that I, want to make a really serious impact? Or is it that I want to take things lightly? These are, and they sound mutually exclusive, but maybe they're not. So, what are these things that again can be sort of core values for us that maybe behavior wise, we can look and see if this is a value of mine, are my behaviors that I'm doing actually in alignment with these values that I have? And if that is the case, then we are typically, living in alignment with our core values. We typically find more meaning again, and more fulfillment. And if we're not, that can be again something that is not something that we need to judge, but is something that we can take a look at and say, maybe this is something that would help me address my stress less, or would help me feel more fulfilled from day to day. All of these things can be really helpful to recognize. So thinking about these 4 domains, and the core values that are associated with them. So taking a minute to write down, now that you have your sort of activities, 2 or 3 core values, if you can, in the 4 life compass domains. So they don't have to be, you don't have to have, if nothing's coming to mind, that's totally fine. Just whatever seems to ring true to you. And so taking a minute to think about that, what are some core values of mine? And then once we have those down, thinking about what are some activities that we did in the past week, and did they reflect these core values? Were there some recharging behaviors that we were already doing this past week that line right up to these core values? Chances are there probably are, sprinkled around here and there, even if they're very simple, they're probably part of our daily life. And then are there times where it's like, oh, that value is one of mine, and I just thought about this scenario this past week, if I had done this behavior, that probably would have been restorative in that moment and would have aligned with my core value. So I'll just take a 20 seconds just to give a pause and have you sort of think about that a little bit. Okay. And so now what we can do, now that we have an idea of sort of like what our values are, what are some restorative activities, and what are some things that we did in the past week, how did our week go, we can give ourselves actually a life compass rating. So you can see in this version of the life compass, I actually have some legends here related to the tick marks that are on the compass. So we have a 5 and a 10. So thinking about this, if you had to rate yourself, thinking about the restorative activities that you participated in that are in alignment with the core values in each of these domains that you have. And this is completely subjective. It's totally personalized, and it is totally you giving yourself your own rating from a score of like 1 to 10. How do I think I did in terms of including restorative activities in the domains of relationships? How do I think I did from 1 to 10 in work, education, or volunteering in terms of activities related to core values? Same thing with health, and same thing with leisure time. So thinking about that, just taking a minute, and then what you're going to do is you're actually going to place a little dot where it is on the line. So for relationships on this spectrum here, is it an 8? Maybe over here, is it closer to a 1? And then, same thing for each one of these in the different directions of the compass. And I'm actually gonna go ahead and do that myself here very quickly while you all do as well. Okay. So what does your compass look like? And so what we can do is we can connect all of the dots to create sort of a shape. And so I'm going to go ahead and show you, hopefully, I'm sorry, my PowerPoint just shut down. So while I am pulling that back up, I will show you my compass, which is certainly not a circle. It is definitely more on, so this part, or this part right here is work. I definitely did quite a few things related to my work values, but the other 3 areas in this past week have definitely been very lacking. And so again, this is something that we don't need to bring judgment to. This is actually just to help us learn. And so then once we do that, we can make a plan for it. So let me go ahead and have my PowerPoint back up. So let's go ahead and share that again. Okay. Okay. So looking at our compass, so my circle was not super large. And really, when we're looking at how large it is, the more space we have, the better. So what this means is we are giving ourselves lots of room to have recovery when we have overall a large circle. And so again, this is correlated in our studies to thriving and for a more meaningful life. a life that feels it has purpose. So a lot of us, I think it's interesting, thinking about that as well as the balance aspect. Is it actually a circle, or is it an elliptical, or is it some other shape? Mine is definitely totally skewed. So I know that I need to work on incorporating 3 of the other domains and incorporating some activities to find more balance. And again, the studies are showing that if we involve more value areas, it's almost like they use the analogy of a wheel a lot. So if you have a circular wheel that's not flat, you can keep on rolling when you hit a bump. When you have definitely a very like off tire or a flat tire, you don't have the buoyancy, the resiliency to be able to continue to move forward. And something just to keep in mind again, like you're never gonna have, I would love to see someone that had a perfect big circle. That would be amazing. I would learn a lot from them, I'm sure. But the reality is we're not perfect. And so this is something that is meant to inform just how we can adjust things so that we're addressing our stress more productively. And so also very important to know that our shape can change from week to week. So we might have a little while where we do have a circle and we're like, oh my gosh, this looks great. I'm doing a great job. But then, maybe we have a week where it's like, oh, this got super skewed. And so that is totally normal and totally appropriate. What we want to just pay attention to though is like, is this pattern continuing? Is it something where it's actually now part of our normal sort of automatic responses? And that can be something where we might be able to integrate a little bit more framework or a little bit of change. So thinking about that, and looking at your circle, were there any domains that weren't addressed? If so, maybe we can think about what are those recharging activities that we thought about initially, and do any of those fall into that domain that we were sort of neglecting? Is that something that we can do? Is there a way that we can balance the circle? Is there a way that we can make the circle even bigger? So thinking about both of those and thinking about specific activities that we can practically do is the key. And so this is really like the nuts and bolts, or the, sort of the ultimate way that we're looking to use this information, and why it's called acceptance and commitment. This is the commitment side of it. So the whole rest of this leading up to this point is acceptance. Like, this is where we're at. It's not good or bad, but let's see if we can make some adjustments to make it even better, make sure that I'm still staying on the right path, that I'm going to be able to thrive and recover and all of these good things that we want in life. And recognizing again that there is flux to this. So, one thing that is also a big sort of misnomer is that happiness is the natural state of human beings. And so, if I just got rid of my stress, if I just got rid of these problems, I would be happy. And the reality is that is not true. The normal state of a human being is actually flux. We're always changing. Our moods are always changing. Our experiences are always changing. So when we can think about that, and the fact that, we're not necessarily doing something wrong if we're not, this joyous, happy person, every moment of every day, that can make us have maybe a little bit easier idea as well to say, is this something that is like sort of a structural recovery kind of scenario that maybe I can address? Or is this just that like life has stress and it has flux, and this is a part of the human experience? Because when we resist that, that's typically where we end up having even more problems. And so if we can accept that, that can be helpful. So now that we have our accepted sort of idea of where we are, the plan that I would love you all to go home with for our activity today, now that you've gone through all that work, is to commit to 2 recharging activities in the next week. So thinking about what specifically is each activity, and where and when you can complete the activity. So that's the first part, where we're saying I'm gonna do this next week. Then we're also gonna schedule the activity. And this is really key. I will tell you, like, even though I'm a mindfulness teacher, there was a long time where I literally had a reminder at lunch every day that popped up that said meditate, because I knew if I didn't, I could get wrapped up and I wouldn't do that restorative activity. And so scheduling is gonna be really key. And then of course, after we do that, then we act. And so, completing the planned activity, Reflecting on how I feel before and after is going to be potentially really helpful. Is it as restorative as I thought it was? Did I actually feel a difference in my body or in my mood or in whatever that key area is in my behaviors? Was I feeling like I had tunnel vision before and then I felt like I was able to see a little bit broader afterwards? If you didn't complete the activity as planned, which also sometimes happens, again, not a reason for judgment. It's more of a opportunity for objective evaluation. What stopped us from doing it? And was it practical in the first place? Or was it something that like we just maybe didn't think about, oh, there was this thing that was a barrier and so I can adjust it in this way? Is there a different activity that might have been more helpful at that point? And then I would love for all of you, once you go through this for a week, to do your life compass rating again and see if your circle has changed. And so that's really the key is, did it change? Did it not change? What ended up being helpful? What ended up not being helpful? Again, looking at this completely objectively, of course it's our subjective experience, but objectively in terms of not needing to judge it. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I know I went through very fast, but want to make sure that you'll have time for your meeting as well. Oh, I see someone's going fishing tomorrow. Definitely a restorative activity. Excellent. And that's something, that's a great example to bring up too, because, not necessarily, this doesn't necessarily need to be like an activity that's in one domain. So fishing could be part of leisure. It also could be, a relationship. Maybe you're bringing somebody along with you. That's a really important activity that you do with someone that you love. So lots of carryover in these different categories as well. Oh, with your wife. That's so nice. I love it.
Dennis, I see that you're unmuted. You can go ahead.
The question I had is that we talked about scheduling things that help reduce our stressors. At the same point, though, is it also important not to get too carried away and spend too much time like on Facebook or watching television or things like that? That you have to identify those things as well.
Absolutely. So I think, when we're thinking about things that add stress to us, I love talking about mindful consumption. So I'm going to stop myself before I go down a rabbit hole because you'll be with me the rest of the night. But with activities in general, if you're noticing yourself like, oh, like I have this stress feeling, like whether it's physiologic or mood or whatever, that is a really great opportunity to just reflect and say, like, was there something that I did that seems to be correlated to this? And definitely social media is a huge one. And I can get into like the reward-based feedback loop that, those dopamine hits that it's specifically designed for us to keep coming back. Even though the results are making us feel worse. Absolutely. Like those are going to be super helpful if we're able to notice things that we're able to change, that are adding stress to our lives. So if there are situations that like we can reduce or minimize or even eliminate that are causing us stress, amazing. Like 100%, that's going to be super effective. You don't even need to go through all of these steps. You just say like, I'm going to cut that out and then see what happens. But the reality is for the other things that we, that are sort of like normal ebbs and flows of life, then that is the part that the restorative activity also might be important to schedule, because, those come just regularly throughout life and it can be easy to sort of miss those as they go on. But yeah, great point, Dennis. I 100% agree.
I see we have a individual phone number, last 4 digits, 4143. You can go right ahead. Okay, maybe they didn't have a question. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
And you can always feel free to reach out, but with that, just for the sake of time, I'll go ahead to the post-test questions. So question 1, true or false, research shows identifying one singular purpose or primary value in life is a key component in reducing stress and experiencing a meaningful life. And that is actually false, despite what conventional wisdom tells us. So actually having a variety of values and recognizing what those are allows us to have more opportunity for diversity, and also allows us to avoid over prioritizing one dimension in life, which again, over time can lead to existential stress, especially if that over prioritized category hits a bump. That can very easily lead to sort of that existential stress and sort of trouble finding meaning kind of scenario. And then question 2, according to ACT, which are the following categories, are core values everyone holds: relationships, health, leisure time, and work, education, volunteering. Definitely all of the above. And so again, all of our research, which has been pretty substantial to this point, this has been around for a few decades now, shows that this, including all these 4 domains, leads to a more balanced life and more reports of meaningful and fulfilling life. And we can use our value-based actions, alignment with our core values, to make sure that we are creating more opportunities for joy and vitality, and help us carry through those things that maybe have meaning or are more stressful, or things when we just have those ebbs and flows where things aren't going quite as pleasantly as we'd like. To have a little more resilience during those times. And that is, take home points: happiness is not a natural human state, emotional fluxes. Stress is not always bad in and of itself, but if we don't recover from it, then it can be. And diversifying our value-based actions and commitments in life leads to a more personally meaningful and fulfilling existence and greater ability to bounce back from hardship. I have the reference here for my favorite workbook on this. A lot of the resources that I drew from this workbook. And then also for the core value identification, if you were struggling with that, I would definitely encourage you to Google core values. There's all sorts of lists out there. I actually personally don't have as easy of a time with the ACT core values that they define as some of the other ones. So I think you can use them interchangeably, but just for the sake of consistency, I use the ACT for today's presentation. And if you want, suggestions on other lists of core values, then you can definitely reach out, and I'm happy to provide some references for you for that as well. And that is it, for real, this time.
All right, well, thank you very much. Any additional questions or comments? Great presentation.
Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, well, thank you very much, Rebecca. And let me pause the recording here so we can get everybody information on the code and evaluation. I did want to go ahead and make sure to bring everyone to attention to 2 upcoming additional continuing education programs that we have coming up this month. If you have been interested in travel health or wanting to advance and expand your immunization care program, we do have our IPHA travel health training program, advanced training program, that'll be occurring on May 20th. And you can still sign up for that up until May 15th. And then we have a new training program for a lot of you that we are now offering. NASPA, which is the National Alliance of State Pharmacy Programs, has taken over the NACDS point of care testing, test and treat certificate training program. And they're going to be offering a national presentation of that program virtually, and that will be offered on May 26th. I didn't put a link to that in there because you should have all received an email to that program announcement today that will, if you go to the registration link, you'll have to log in to the IPHA website. That'll then give you a code that will give you a discount for that program for state members. And I want to reiterate this here as I reiterated it had staff put it in the email today. Any sharings of codes is considered to be unprofessional and unethical conduct. Your CEs will be stripped for that program for you, and for any individual it's shared with. And we will follow it up with a complaint to the Board of Pharmacy for further discussion. Sorry to have to be that serious, but past behaviors determines this type of a warning. And so we just want to make sure we work hard to bring these type of programs to everyone at a discounted price, and that is for member benefits. And so if you want to have, individuals who want to take care of, have this type of opportunities, please make sure that they are a member of the association. We need to continue to add people on anyway. We're going to be having additional opportunities over the next coming months with some regional programs. We're going to be getting on the road a little bit. And so keep an eye out for those dates and times and places. That's we're a little bit early this evening, but that's all we had scheduled. But if we have any questions or comments for the good of the order.
Garth, may the 4th be with you.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Can you share with the group about the update in CMS and DIR fees?
Yes. The national organizations are still digging through. On Friday, CMS did release a final rule on DIR. It's to go into full effect in 2024. It will put DIR to the point of sale, which should bring more transparency to DIR. I'm trying to remain optimistic about the ruling. But as we know, with most changes in laws, require that usually we see the PBMs shift to new definitions for newer things. We will probably see a dramatic decrease in DIR, trying to show that everything was a false information, that this was a problem, and we'll see it come up in another definition. So I'm remaining, unfortunately, a little pessimistic with how CMS presented their opinion on the rule. It still allows for what they were calling negotiated price, and that was very open-ended, which is really disappointing in seeing CMS come out with something that was so open-ended, because that's what got us into the problems with the first place with DIR. So hopefully it won't be that big of an issue and we can actually see some reversals. I just wish we could have gone away with this altogether and found a better way to address adherence and trying to make sure we have value-based healthcare in the pharmacy realm than what we're doing with DIR. So it's good because CMS has recognized that it's wrong. I think it is shameful again that it took CMS to this point to recognize something that increased, I think, 270,000% over the last decade didn't concern them. Because I can guarantee if it was on pharmacy that had caused that 270,000% increase, there would have been a sledgehammer a long time ago. We'll see where it goes, and hopefully we can keep pharmacies moving along as we continue to do other reforms in that area. Any other questions? All right, everyone. Well, everyone have a great evening. Enjoy the warmer weather that's supposedly coming. It is May. I keep looking at my weather report, trying to remind myself that it's May. And we'll have warmer days ahead, and we'll see everyone in June. A reminder, just to continue to look for those education programs. Those registration deadlines will be coming up soon. So May 20th for the travel program and May 26th for the point of care testing program. So everyone have a great evening. Thank you.